We're all set.
Excellent. Thank you. And so at 7:03, we will call tonight's meeting of the Norwalk Board of Education to order. Just by way of roll call, we have, I think, 8 board members present, myself, excuse me, myself, Colin Houston, Godfrey Azima, Diana Carpio, Erica De Palma, Janine Randolph, Kara Bakey, Mary Ellen Flaherty Ludwig, and Sherry Brown. That's who we have present currently, and we're going to go directly into our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you to our wonderful students at Norwalk Public Schools for leading us in tonight's pledge. And thank you to everyone who is attending tonight remotely. I just want to take one quick moment to express gratitude for everyone bearing with us as we pivoted tonight's meeting to being fully remote. A few of us on the board are a little under the weather, and given the slight uptick in COVID cases in Norwalk and wanting to make sure that we keep our entire community safe and healthy, we decided this was the best way to proceed with tonight's business without putting anybody at undue risk. And then before we do go into tonight's full agenda, I also wanted to take a quick moment at the beginning of tonight's meeting to call for a moment of silence. As I believe most folks are aware, we had one of our families suffered a very unspeakable tragedy this past week here in Norwalk. And we want to spend a minute reflecting and sending our only best thoughts, wishes, and lots of love to the family of Summer Fawcett, her parents Blair and Lindsay, and her brother Blair, all members of the Norwalk Public Schools family who have endured untold tragedy this week. So if you would please join me in observing a moment of silence in honor and memory of Summer. Thank you so much. And we know it's not going to be an easy road of recovery, and we want to reiterate, as the district has already said, that Norwalk Public Schools stands behind all of our families, and especially Summer's classmates and teachers at Cranberry. And we know it's going to be a very tough time. Our entire district stands with every family at this very trying time. And so with that, we will go into tonight's agenda. Tonight, we do want to highlight a very happier note for our spotlight. To do so, I'll introduce our Board Secretary, Godfrey Azima.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we will be spotlighting NPS students placing at Regional and State History Day virtual events. The Norwalk Board of Ed is proud to recognize NPS students for placing in the 2022 Connecticut History Day contest and the Fairfield County Regional History Day contest. Competing alongside students from surrounding districts, NPS students placed in a variety of categories during the remote events. Several NPS students received awards for their work during the state contest and may advance to the national virtual competition in June. Students researched and presented impressive projects with topics ranging from the Cuban Missile Crisis to the creation of the Peace Corps, the debate on joining the French Revolution, and the history of the Merritt Parkway. Connecticut History Day annually engages over 4,000 middle and high school students in historical research, interpretation, and creative expression through project-based learning. The program seeks to bring students, teachers, museums, and scholars together to support young people as they engage in history. Students across the district participate in local, state, and national academic competitions throughout the year. In addition to History Day, events include Read Across America Day and Invention Convention. NPS students continue to showcase their talent and creativity, having been recognized by the Connecticut Regional Scholastic Art Program, Martin Luther King Jr. Essay Challenge, Future Business Leaders of America Conference, Connecticut Teen Vision Show, and Samsung Solve for Tomorrow contest. The Board of Education honors these students for their hard work and dedication, as well as the educators whose commitment enables students to grow as learners. Congratulations to those students who have placed in this competition, and good luck to those who move on to the national competition next month. Individual honorees for state awards goes to Kayla Linder from West Rocks Middle School and Isabella Kibbe from West Rocks Middle School. Group Project Award winners for Nathan Hale Middle School include Roy Rock, Steve Martin Charles, Emmy Anderson, Xavier Miles, and Ian Mills. Group Project Award winners for Nathan Hale Middle School: Anna Kovchuk, forgive me if I pronounced that wrong, Olivia Papadopoulos, Mariana Joy Montenegro, Daniel Guo. Regional awards go to, for project winners from Ponus Ridge STEAM Academy: Jasmine Diaz, Natalie Garcia Aguilar, Kimberly Diaz, Allinson Morales. Individual award winners from West Rocks Middle School: Kayla Linder, Isabella Kibbe, and Michael Wu. Group award winners from West Rocks Middle School: Julia Girardi, Brandon Leave, Adelaide Reynolds, Lydia Yusi. Group project award winners from Nathan Hale Middle School are Greta Radecki and Michaela Joyce. Individual project award winner from P-Tech Norwalk, Amelia Elsa Schweizer, and the individual project award winners from CMS are Gianna Bertel and Ainsley Wakander. Continuing on to recognize some of our more exceptional students, we also would like to take time to recognize, as part of our ongoing focus on student achievement at Norwalk Public Schools, we'd like to recognize the seniors who will continue their education at a variety of higher learning institutions across the country. As represented the class of 2022, these students have been active leaders in their school communities and have earned the respect of their teachers and peers. Beginning with Ramses Perez. He's a high school senior that attends Brian McMahon High School. He's excited to attend the University of Virginia in the fall. In 5 years, Ram can visualize himself working in business. A quote he lives by is, "Take it step by step." Congratulations, Ramsey. Isabella Montanez is currently attending P-Tech High School. She is pleased to share that she will be attending UConn in the fall. And in 5 years, Isabella sees herself furthering her education and working in a profession she chooses. Jaden Whitmore, he's a senior at P-Tech High School as well. He's excited to share that he's been accepted to Wentworth Institute of Technology. In 5 years, he sees himself as a software developer, an engineer, and a tech writer. The quote he lives by is "win." Mateo Rufo is a high school senior at CGS. In the fall, Mateo will be attending Georgia Institute of Technology. In 5 years, Mateo sees himself exploring entrepreneurship in aerospace engineering and artificial intelligence. It doesn't stop there. He looks forward to investing in renewable energies and trying to do humanitarian work with his income. A quote he lives by is, "We are not going in circles, we are going upwards. The path is a spiral. We've already climbed many steps." Herman Hesse Siddhartha. Amar Navarro is a senior that attends Brian McMahon High School, but not for long. He's excited to share that he will be attending UConn in the fall. In 5 years, Amard sees himself working at the National Aerospace Administration. A quote he lives by is, "Rome wasn't built in a day, but they were laying bricks every hour." James Clear. And last but not least, Cion Wilson is a senior at Norwalk High School. She's excited to share that she will be attending Clark Atlanta in the fall. She is undecided at the moment of where she will be in 5 years, but she knows she will be working in her purpose. Quote that Cion lives by, "We will all at some point encounter hurdles to gaining access and entry, moving up and conquering self-doubt, but on the other side is the capacity to own opportunity and tell our own story." Stacey Abrams. Congratulations to everyone. And I'm excited to see your success and look forward to welcoming your newfound talents and contributing to further growth here in Norwalk.
Absolutely. I invite everybody to unmute and applaud because that's such a huge, here we go.
And some of the students are here, Mr. Asima. Once they are available, I will let the board know so that they can join us. They're a little bit delayed in coming forward.
Absolutely. And, you know, our virtual applause will take place tonight, but we will look forward to when we can congratulate you all in person, as Godfrey said. It's so important for us to highlight the important and amazing work being done by our students throughout the district. It's been a, oh, here's my dog. It's been a challenging time in more ways than we can say. And we know that public education has come under lots of different criticisms. Our students are always proving anybody wrong when they say anything that negative about their achievements. They continue to inspire us on the board, and we take every opportunity we can to highlight their amazing work. And we know that there's a lot more. The students highlighted tonight. Congratulations to you and to our students who are continuing to confirm their plans for after high school. We look forward to congratulating you and wishing you well as well. And thank you, Godfrey. Next
Chairman, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Some of the kids are in the attendees group. I don't know if you want to elevate them so that the community can recognize them, or.
Yes, please. Yes, let's put them on screen.
Ralph, do you mind elevating them? I'm just going to ask the students to raise their hand so that Ralph can easily move you to the panel. There you go. There you go.
Sorry, we're going to put you on the spot tonight, but you know what? You put yourself on the spot by being so amazing. Yes, I see some folks in the waiting room. Mateo, Kayla, Ram, Ainsley.
Kayla, Sarah.
There we
There
go.
they are.
Thank you so much for joining us virtually tonight. We want to congratulate you all. There's so many, I can't see them all on my screen at the same time. But we want to highlight you. We want to congratulate you and just tell you how amazingly proud you are making us and the entire district. And I'm sure your families.
Ralph, we still have Xavier that needs to be, oh, there we go. There we go. Xavier, do we see you? There he is. Wonderful.
Now that our scholars are on screen, I'm going to ask for another round of applause just to put them on the spot.
Yay!
I just got a text. There's one more student. He's under his mom's name, Sarah Amato.
Deadly 2017 neo-Nazi rally that spurred his run for president against Donald Trump. You know, the one.
Congratulations again to all our scholars. We are so grateful to you for making us so proud. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Dr.
Chairman.
Yeah, that's very important. Okay, Next on the agenda, we do have an opportunity for public comment. Anyone attending in the public who would like to speak, you have up to 3 minutes.
I said no.
I did not see any emailed public comments, and again, I appreciate folks bearing with us for pivoting to a virtual meeting tonight.
Yes, so anybody in the public, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak.
Okay, I don't
No
think I
hands.
see any hands. So that will take us into the next item on the agenda. Oh, I do see Sherelle. Sherelle is in the attendees, which is the superintendent's report. Going to introduce Dr. Estrella, who is also feeling a little under the weather. So we're all bearing with each other tonight.
Thank you. If I start coughing, please excuse my illness. Thank you for joining us today. We have 2 important presentations for the board and the community at large. The first is the Center for Assessment had conducted a study of our assessment system across our organization at large. We initiated in this review several months ago with the hopes that we could gain a better understanding of, 1, the knowledge within the organization around how to utilize assessments to inform instructional practices in the classroom, and 2, to utilize it as a tool to improve instruction daily in the class. In this work, we wanted also to utilize this information. So as we build our data and analytics team, that fortunately, thanks to the wonderful philanthropic partners that we have throughout our district, we are able to do. We wanted to make sure that we had this information as we prepared this new team, and have this information ready so that we could move forward with the work we needed to do. 1, in supporting the leadership within the schools to develop a data-driven instructional cycle and culture within their schools. And 2, so that the central team also knew how to most effectively support our teams. Mary, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Marianne Shepherd has led part of that work in collaboration with Rob Pennington and Dr. Case. So I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce the team and speak to this work. Then after we have an opportunity to immerse ourselves in this part of the conversation, the second element that we will be presenting today is our yearly Panorama, bi-yearly Panorama survey that provides us with really important information in terms of how students are feeling about the instructional practices in the district, a little bit on the social emotional arena, as well as just overarching feedback from our families and staff. So I'm going to turn it over now to the team, and we'll start off with the Center for Assessment, and then we will transition into the findings from the Panorama survey.
Great, thank you, Dr. Estrella. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Juan Brove right here from NCIEA, who's going to walk you through their findings, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how we received the findings and the action, the steps that we've taken in response to those, and then also some next steps that we've identified for moving forward as well. So Juan.
Marianne, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to have joined you. I appreciate everyone's ability to jump on it from what it sounds like a quickly pivoting to virtual meeting. I'm actually joining you from Colorado, so I'm happy that I'm able to join you from so far away. So if you just bear with me for one moment, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I do have I have your video up, so if anyone has any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to kind of understand kind of the nuances of this approach, and I do want to thank NPS just for really wanting to go through this process. I think there's a lot that we learned, and I think a lot that I hope the district learned. So we'll really be covering kind of 5 core ideas this evening. After a brief introduction, there's 3 major areas that I'd like to make sure that the board is informed about. One is around the foundation and the basis for those recommendations. And then there's a series of a few recommendations around a common district assessment, and then a series of recommendations about supporting the use of those assessments and resources. The concluding remarks are framed from really a position of when we wrote the report. So one important contextual point is that these recommendations and this report was intended to be a springboard for this school year. So the folks from NPS are going to be able to give you an opportunity to share, I think, some of the work that they've embarked on as a result of these recommendations, but we did want to make sure that you had an opportunity to see them in their entirety. As I'm sure you've seen, there's also the board report, or the report itself, that goes into much greater detail, but we're hoping that this at least provides both a primer and a bit of an overview. Diving into the introduction of the project, I thought it would be important to share a little bit with what the Center for Assessment does. We are a nonprofit kind of technical and policy consulting firm. We work with over 30 states and districts right now. I think we cover in a few different contracts, almost all 50 states and territories. And we are intentionally small. We're a nonpartisan group. We're 14 full-time professionals with doctoral degrees, and I myself have worked in schools, districts at the state level as a researcher, as a vendor, and now as a technical assistance provider. And so we have quite a bit of a span, and we actually work with some nearby states that are close to you. I've actually done some work with the state of Connecticut in the past. So it's always nice to actually work with districts because it tends to make sure that we are pressure testing our ideas in the real world. As part of the work, really the Norwalk Public Schools contracted with the center to help develop an overall assessment plan. That plan really was under the direction of Dr. Estrella, and he worked with representatives across the district to bring them to us so that we can better understand the current landscape in terms of kind of curricular assessment and instructional context. So the recommendations that are proposed here really were intended to be more of an option to meet a variety of needs. We saw 2 primary paths forward, and they did differ in terms of involvement and investment. And depending on those routes, there might be different needs or different specifications that would have to be put in place for moving forward. Our approach was generally kind of over 3 steps. We were first interested in exploring the context. We really did not feel comfortable making recommendations if we didn't truly understand exactly how the district was set up. We then engaged in a significant amount of need sensing. And that need sensing was informed initially by document reviews, conversations with leadership at the district, and then ongoing interviews and focus groups with key personnel. That then enabled us to propose a series of recommendations that specified not just the assessment characteristics that align with the goals that the district really wanted to prioritize, but also a series of implementation options and some potential recommendations around how to think about resources, mostly from a curricular standpoint. So there's a lot of assessment literacy that we try to bake into the report and that we hope can be used as a touch point to come back to as the district works with schools across the area. Before moving on to foundations and recommendations, I'm wondering if I just want to pause for a moment to see if there's any questions.
Any questions so far from board members?
No.
Yeah, I think we can continue. Thank
Great.
you.
Now, as a foundation for the recommendations, we really had a 3-part data collection strategy. We started with a document scan, recognizing that many of the strategic planning documents were in the process of being revised, which ended up being a pretty, I think, timely opportunity to inform the district leadership how they could make some changes moving forward. We obtained feedback directly from district leaders, and then we engaged in focus groups with what we were referring to as exemplary and representative educators, as well as a series of school administrators. That distinction we thought was very important because we wanted to identify, based on the work that's going on today, how did those educators who truly understood the role of standards and how curriculum is implemented in schools and how assessment can be used to drive curriculum-driven decisions, versus those who are representative educators of kind of the general population. What's then that distance between those two things? And the school administrators provided us with a sense of context. What are what's the climate and the culture within schools that might inform recommendations to bridge that distance between where we are today and where we want to be, that we're seeing viewed through the eyes of exemplary educators. The foundational concepts that laid out both the data collection strategy and the engagement with stakeholders and the report is that we recognize that there are a range of assessments being given that are outside those that are typically required by the district, and that often those assessments do not have a coherent assessment strategy. It's a question whether those assessment strategies are developed at the district level or the school level, but often that we see that there's really a gap of that at the state, district, and school levels. We wanted to make sure that we did consider stakeholders' information needs so that ultimately we could make recommendations around a system that maximize support around their highest priority needs. But then ultimately, none of this work could be done if it wasn't grounded in a clear vision for teaching and learning. We spent probably a significant amount of time early on trying to obtain and clarify the vision for teaching and learning that the district had, and then to determine how far we thought that implementation might be in terms of the school on the ground actions that we're seeing among teachers and educators. One call out that I wanted to make sure that we highlighted within the report was around a priority that became evident from the beginning. It's a priority that was identified on behalf of district leadership, but also something that we saw reflected in many of the comments that were elicited by educators and by administrators. And really it was around this idea of equitable learning opportunities. Everyone really wanted to provide accelerated learning opportunities for students, especially for those who are historically underperforming or historically underserved. But that the driver was to think about how could the assessment strategy actually address all of the various assessment tools and resources that are necessary, and how can those then be prioritized in a coherent way to make sure that we can actually drive an emphasis on not just status, but growth. And those two key concepts are very important because the move to new accountability systems and move towards different assessment resources that are available, they really try to highlight this idea of growth. How well are students making progress towards the standards over time? But the important thing is that you want to make sure that you're also addressing how well are students meeting expected grade expectations over time. So is that growth enough to catch them up to the standards over time? For students that are actually above the standard, are they growing enough to keep them ahead of the standard over time? So there's an important nuance for those students who are above the standard. We want to catch them before they start to fall behind. And for those students that are below the standard, we want to help identify ways that we can accelerate their learning so that we can actually catch them back up to the standard and make sure that they don't stay behind. Based on kind of some foundational concepts and the way in which we collected data, there are several considerations that are related to a common district assessment that I did want to share with everyone. So I'm going to pause after this section because this is relatively brief, but I think the idea is that we're stemming from some of these key viewpoints about equitable opportunities and focusing on both status and growth, and how this translates into a common district assessment. We've spent some time with administrators and educators obtaining feedback specifically related to common assessments. And I want to distinguish between this idea of interim assessment, which you see on the first bullet, and summative assessment and also formative assessment practice. In the work that we do with states and districts, we recognize that interim assessment are those periodic assessments that are used either to inform instructional decisions, to inform determinations for whether you're doing tiered interventions, to monitor progress, to predict performance on larger assessments or end of course exams, where summative assessment is really what we tend to think of as like the end of year testing, sometimes standardized, sometimes for end of course. But we distinguish those two assessment events from formative assessment practices, which is indistinguishable from the actual teaching process. So you're going to see me refer to common interim assessments throughout this discussion because we're really talking about those things that are impact assessment events and not so much those formative assessment practices that are real-time check-ins where teachers are engaging with students to make adjustments for instruction on the fly. One key area that we heard from educators was that they did see limited instructional utility to common interim assessment. That doesn't mean that there was no instructional utility, but they did seem to be potentially irrelevant. They were either too frequently administered, so it took away from actual instruction, or they were too infrequent to provide enough detail to determine how they address their next lesson plan or the next unit. But fundamentally, there was a lack of alignment in the information provided compared to the information that they were teaching. So because there was a lack of alignment, they didn't know if their assessments were on track with what they were teaching in their curriculum, or if their assessments were matching their scope and sequence, or even if it lined up to their lesson plans or the curriculum stuff. What they did note is that they enjoyed having common performance benchmarks. It enabled educators across the grade, within a school, or even sometimes across schools, to be able to compare notes on how students were doing. So if a kid matriculated from one school to another, it did give them some information as to how they were performing, especially if the curriculum was entirely different, or if there may have even been a different interpretation of what standards look like in a given course. Administrators noted that there was a little bit more value in the common performance assessments, mostly because of the aggregate data. They found that they could engage in better monitoring efforts. They can engage in program evaluation, whether certain interventions were working, whether certain curricular decisions were playing out as intended, and to inform data-driven conversations. So you can imagine that these common interim assessments, when you're giving them across an entire grade and you have 3 different grades and you're comparing what students are having trouble with, let's say, fractions versus just ratio-based thinking, you can start to figure out how an entire grade might have to pinpoint their mathematical intervention. It becomes a little less informative when you're doing something every 9 weeks or every 3 months, and you're then having to make a decision on a student-by-student basis. So administrators tended to find a little bit more value with the common interim assessments than did the educators. There were some commonalities, however, in how folks thought about the common interim assessment. The common benchmark, even for educators, for teachers, believed that was a value, mostly because it provided a basis for comparing results across students, across classrooms, and across schools. I would say almost unequivocally across educators and administrators, they believe that these types of comparisons were perceived to be a necessary component of district assessment systems, but they needed to not be so heavily the only component of the district assessment system. One way to think about this is that if common interim assessments were only administered 3, 4, 5 times a year, they naturally have to hold more of the content that's being assessed. So they are kind of big picture information that tells you whether you're moving on the right track, potentially. So they can be used to corroborate some of the smaller informal and formal assessment events that are happening in the classroom. If I see my classroom is showing a tremendous amount of progress on the unit we just covered, let's say it's on author's intent and examination of like implicit and explicit evidence in text. And my bell ringers, my end of week tests, and my unit assignment shows that they're making great progress. But then all of a sudden, my benchmark assessment is showing that no one's really making progress. That poses some questions. Does that mean that my local assessments are somewhat off? Did I not cover the content the same way that I thought? Or was there a disconnect between what's being administered on the benchmark assessment and what I'm actually covering in my class? Those are all questions that have to be addressed. And until those questions of alignment and coherence are addressed, you're really not going to get the same benefit out of these common benchmarks than you would have those things been answered. So those comparisons are necessary, but there's several things that have to happen, which are, I think, described throughout the report that indicate what are some steps that are important to take in order to support those comparisons moving forward. As a result, comments really reflected these 2 very competing goals among educators. On the one hand, assessments should inform student-level instructional decisions at the classroom level. So these are those more finer-grained decisions that help me determine what am I teaching tomorrow, or how am I adjusting my instruction on the fly. On the other hand, they also really craved information to be able to support comparisons across classrooms, schools, or students within the district. how are my students performing really like across the scope and sequence compared to everybody else in the district or compared to students across the hall. You can see that I've intentionally put these on two very different kind of text colors because in one case, instructional decisions require a very specific kind of assessment. In the other case with comparisons, they require a much different kind of assessment design. Instructional decisions have to be smaller, they're quicker, they are less reliable because they just get to do it again and again and again. Reporting comparisons means you need a kind of a bigger pool of items, you need bigger grain size, you need a little bit more comparability, you need more reliability, a little bit more standardization, and some assurances that you're actually covering the content enough that you can make comparisons to what my kids learned with base 10 and what a teacher's kids learned base 10 down the hall. These two goals require different assessment designs and therefore competing assessment characteristics, which is just a more specific way of saying one assessment can't do everything. So we really try to bring to light this idea of an assessment system and recognizing that there's minimal resources in general from the assessment side of things, but there's limited resources in terms of time, personnel, money. There really has to be a choice of prioritizing where that investment comes in to support the greatest gain with the shortest amount of distance or investment in assessment. That's often in the curricular space, but you do need these external benchmarks to help track whether you're making progress, especially whether you're determining whether you're closing the gap against the standards for those historically underperforming or those historically underserved student groups. So before moving on, I did want to take a moment to pause. I know that's quite a bit of information right there to address any questions or any clarification points, or if you needed any kind of examples that we might have heard from educators and administrators related to those topics around the common assessment.
Thank you, Juan. Not sure if any board members have any comments or questions so far.
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, Mary Ellen.
I would like to hear Juan, some examples of some benchmarks in English or math.
Sure. Some common benchmarks that we see, Mary Ellen, thank you for your question. Some common benchmarks that we see used, and I'm going to start with kind of like big grain size. So what you see might like 3 times a year, 4 times a year. There's the usual suspects. There's something like there's Renaissance STAR. There's NWEA's MAP. There's Curriculum Associates iReady. There's something one that's a little lesser known as Santron actually has one as well. That's the same, the bubble people. There are large-scale assessment providers, the ones that do standardized testing. They're actually developing different types of these common benchmarks as well that are probably more aligned to the full set of standards. So just to run through those few examples, one thing like STAR is that one, it can be administered kind of, I think a lot of folks use that monthly. They use it to align to kind of an RTI style of intervention. NWEA MAP, there's a few different models of that, but one that gained a lot of traction was one that's 3 times a year. And that's to kind of determine whether students are growing within the year so that you kind of have a little supplementary information that is in addition to whether students are growing across years. The one with, as an example, the iReady from Curriculum Associates, that one's a little bit more attached to an intact curriculum. So there are a series of assessments that are administered at the end of units or chunks of units that kind of help determine whether students have mastered that content as you're going through. And things like the ones that are more aligned to vendor developed, those are more about predicting predicting performance on the end of year assessment that's used for standardized testing. So you can hear even from those 4 different examples, they're going to cover a different set of standards. They're probably going to have a different level of performance expectation, and they're going to have a different grain size. The ones that are trying to predict to the state summative, they're kind of like a mini state summative. So they're covering the full set of standards, but they're much shorter, they're less reliable, and you can imagine that the first time you test, you're going to be way underperforming. As you go through the year, by the end of the year, you're probably going to do much better. But for ones that are attached more to chunks of the curriculum, if you just pretend that the 4 9-week periods are broken out into 9 weeks, you might administer an assessment at the end of the 9 weeks, and then the next 9 weeks, and the next 9 weeks. So what your hope is rather than seeing kids grow from low to medium to high performance, is that if you've done a good job covering that curriculum for the first 9 weeks, when you administer that test, they should do pretty well for based on what you did cover those 9 weeks. However, what you can imagine, if you think a little bit about the way that probably educators design their tests or schools develop their own common tests, that model where you're assessing at the end of a unit chunk probably duplicates some of the information that's already being obtained by teachers and educators and administrators, because they've already developed those assessments. So even though there was a recognition of the value of some of the common interim assessments and those different types of benchmarks, I think what we did here is that educators recognized that there was some overlap between what they were using in some cases in their own classrooms and what they were getting from certain tools, and then also what they were getting from tools that were purchased to those tools that were provided by the state, which I think is part of the strategy that Norwalk engaged in then after the recommendation report, which I think we'll cover in 2 more sections.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Juan. I just wanted to ask, and you may be getting into this as you get to the recommendations, but going back to your point about, some of the slightly competing thoughts about how we do assessment, and your earlier point about equity for our students, and how do we help those students who may be falling behind? How do we make sure that they're not falling too far behind? If you plan to, or if you can address in some way, I think there's a perception among some of the community that kind of equity work and assessment requires what's sometimes called a dumbing down of curriculum, or in some way compromises the achievement of high-performing students. So I don't know if you can address that as part of this review of assessments.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
And I didn't go into too much detail in the recommendations. The report does speak to some, I think, strategies that can prioritize equity. I will say I want to delineate between 2 concepts in terms of equity, and then make kind of a direct recommendation for the board and the district to consider moving forward. These weren't included in the report, but I think are important just in general. So please don't let me forget to do that. The short answer to your question is no, and it should not. And there's reasons for that. The standards as written in most states represent what is the best representation, if you imagine what standards look like from K to 12, where they're backwards mapped to provide students with basically a fair shot at succeeding in post-secondary endeavors, whether that's community college, 4-year college, post-secondary training, career-based technical training, and those standards need to actually not be watered down. The assessment itself, whether standardized assessment, purchased off the shelf stuff, locally developed assessments, they need to be minimally held to the same complexity and performance expectation as is named in the standards. We can do a lot to monitor whether students are making progress within that performance expectation using a lot of different strategies in assessment design, in the same way that teachers actually engage in that same kind of scaffolding behavior to help students who are not accessing the standards at their intended complexity early on in the year. So I'm going to talk about an example I think literary analysis is a perfect example. It's less so I think in math. Math is a little bit more discrete over time. But if you think about this idea of argumentative writing, text-dependent analysis, that's like an end-of-year expectation. No one who gets a set of kids coming into the beginning of the year thinks that kids are going to be able to inherently, in a few weeks, master this idea of text-dependent analysis. they have to first learn how to distinguish between, I mentioned this earlier, explicit and implicit evidence. So if you're looking at a picture, explicit evidence are just those things that you see. Is it day? How many people are in the frame? You know, what's the setting? Implicit evidence are those things that you can determine based on what your interpretation of the picture is. If there's a ball being tossed in the air, you know the ball is in the air, that's explicit, but it's implicit who threw that ball. Is the recipient scared or excited? That's all implicit stuff. And you can imagine that the first thing that an educator would have to do around that is first help them kind of decode what's on the screen visually. Then they work through explicit evidence. Then they work through implicit evidence. Then they work through synthesis of an argument. Then they can work through, and then they carry that over into text. So in the way that a teacher is scaffolding across those standards, we really want to know, using assessment, whether it's local assessment, classroom assessment, purchase assessment, standardized assessment, is there evidence that kids are on the kind of the lower end of the standard understanding, or are they working their way up, or are they at the expected complexity of the standard? And what we usually tend to use, not always so accurately, but synonymously with complexity tends to be performance. So if a student's proficient on some of these assessments, then we tend to say, we believe that they have sufficiently mastered the grade level content. What tends to happen, in my opinion, is that there's a significant, I think, groundswell of interest in, are these assessments themselves inequitable by design? And I think that's probably an elephant in the room that's always worth talking about. One thing that's important that I do truly believe is that the assessments are designed by both federal requirement, by peer review through kind of industry best practice, and by professional judgment, is that they have to be free from bias and from overly sensitive content. And what that means is we try to strip out noise so that we really can say, do these kids know the standards? What we tend to see with disparity in performance for high-performing and low-performing students, especially if they're done by subgroups, is that the assessment is reflecting what I believe to be inequities in the system. And what I mean by that is the conditions of learning. Often students who are historically high-performing just have fewer barriers to having them access the next grade level content. And so if you have students that are historically underperforming, they're coming with a deficit from prior grades, which then means greater acceleration efforts have to be put in place. And but a large scale assessment is not enough. And in some of these cases, benchmark assessments may not be enough. So one thing that's really important is to trust your educators, because they're going to be able to help you navigate whether their classroom assessments are telling more that are making fast enough progress. If you think about standardized testing is like a GPS, that tells you the turn by turn for the most part, but it pretty much just gives you overall route guidance. Your benchmark assessments are kind of like the being able to look at things like your mile markers and what stops are coming up and whether there's a gas station and whether you need to use the restroom or whether your gas gauge is low. But the teacher is the driver. They're the ones navigating the traffic. And you could, if you're set your GPS, let's say you're in Connecticut and you have to drive cross country to California and you have to drive, and I gave you 3 weeks to do it, you could pull that drive off. So a teacher could naturally drive that traffic and work with the GPS. But now if I told you to drive that route in 3 days, highly unlikely you're going to get that done. So I think it's thinking about how can you piece together the different amounts of information to establish a plan that enables for sufficient amounts of time to make that cross-country trip. So I think that's where the idea of the standards have to be appropriately set for all students to try to strive for, but the routes to scaffolding students' access to those standards is what has to be variable on the day-to-day, in the same way that you need some benchmarks to tell you whether students are meeting the standard, but then you need other resources and tools and information to tell you whether they're making progress on that kind of equivalent scaffolding on the instruction, and then you're seeing that on the assessment side of things. I know that's a kind of a long answer, but I want it to be thorough because I think it's a really important concept.
No, thank you. I think it's a very helpful analogy, especially for somebody like me who's always getting lost. So.
Yeah, and Colin, I did want to set just one general recommendation for whatever route the district decides to move forward. One thing that we are trying to push forward in large scale assessment, at least, is revamping the idea of representativeness and representation. Diversity, the diversity, inclusion, and expansion of kind of person profiles is something that the large scale industry is trying to do from the ground up, which means when we have folks that are looking at item design, when we're having folks look at standard design, when we have looked at assessment design, we're trying to be more representative of the actual teaching and student population. One thing that we recognize is that there's many differences between the student demographics and the teaching demographics. So obviously there's pipeline efforts to make those two things look more similar, but we are struggling as I think, educationally as an industry in policymaking roles and federal roles to make sure that the policymaking body is as representative as the educating body. So there are plenty of opportunities where the state is going to ask for folks to review standards, to review the assessment. And so I would cast as wide of a net as possible within your own community to see who you can get to be represented on those committees, but also push your vendors, whoever you purchase an assessment from or whatever assessment you're using, advocate for greater representation in their assessment design catalog and ensure that you have your own local voices represented on that. They're usually pretty good about that, but it's something that they don't tend to do if you don't ask.
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, moving on to recommendations around assessment and resources. We're almost done. I try to keep the slides light, but I know I guess I'm talking a lot. So you can see that there are really like this branch of recommendations. We talked about the common district assessment on the far left. So we're going to focus really on the remainder, which is the use of assessments and curriculum and assessment-related resource and implementation. So there are, think about this like a 3x3 or 3x4 set of recommendations. For common assessments, where we left NPS to think is to really determine the highest priority uses, consider what other information needs are important, and invest in those right resources. Those high priority uses are really about content granularity, what's the frequency that's necessary, how much reporting is necessary, and what score comparability is desired. So if your goal is to understand whether students are making progress towards these grade level expectations, you're going to need something that actually has content that's at that level of expectation. And if you want to be able to make those claims, if a student moves from school A to school B to school C, then you're going to need some level of comparability across those scores. That does mean less flexibility in the assessment design. If you're, however, wanting information need, that second sub-recommendation, where it's really all about making progress against the curriculum, then you're going to have to prioritize things like alignment standards, alignment of scope and sequence, being clear about what the learning goals are, and making sure the progress monitoring needs are actually coherent with the information that you're seeking. It's not going to be helpful for me to tell someone who wants to know whether kids are learning fractions that overall they are not proficient in math. That's not a useful piece of information. So you have to start, the more specific you want your recommendation, the narrower your information needs to be. And then finally, investing in the right resources, because and this is not about just kind of picking and choosing where the investment should be. It's that there's also a lot of kind of capacity building that has to happen to help educators understand the design, how it should be used, and how it's reported and how you can access the information. Because if folks don't understand what the tools look like, the investment in the actual tools themselves is wasted. So it's kind of, we talk about there's all these kind of criteria and evaluation that are important, but utility is often raised to the highest. Because if you have all the other ones, reliability, validity, fairness, if it's not useful, no one's going to use it. So it doesn't matter that it's valid, reliable, and fair. You have to think about those kind of in conjunction and are they all coherent together? As far as the implementation recommendations go for the common interim assessments, this is all about determining what test information is most important, what resources to support test use are most important, what PD do you need for administration, and how coherent is it with local practice? The test information, think about that as most cases, folks aren't going to just like flip through the sample tests on a Sunday afternoon. This is not how it typically works. But they are going to be looking, they're going to want to see what are the blueprints, what's being covered, how are things being scored, what do the items look like, what are exemplars? And I don't mean examples of items, I mean like the best types of items, so that people can actually replicate the development of those items in their own classroom use. What are resources to support the test use? So basically, how do I use this information when I think about performance expectations? So one of the underlying commonalities to a lot of these recommendations is that you want to think about the complexity of the standards, and does the complexity of the standards match the performance expectations? And then how do we basically run our way through from the beginning of the year, low complexity moving up to high complexity? Professional development is relatively self-explanatory, but it really is about eliminating the kind of the annoyance that is administration. If I feel like it's a difficult system to learn to use, then I'm not going to get any benefit from the system. But if it becomes part of my typical routine, then having access to the information is actually where I can focus on, rather than administering the assessment. And then finally, coherence with local practice. And I do think that's probably one of the more important ones, because you want to make sure that you're kind of syncing up with how folks do analysis, interpretation, and use of data. But most of this should be involved around curriculum. One thing that we did hear from educators is that there was a desire to have resources to actually help better understand curriculum and standards. I'll talk a little bit more about that in, I think, the next or the third recommendation, but a through line through this is, if you don't understand the standards and curriculum, you're not going to be able to use the information on the assessment to then figure out how you're making progress on the standards and the curriculum. Another key recommendation was around curriculum investment. And I will admit that when we first designed some of the focus group protocols, we did not think this was going to be as heavy of a focal area for educators, both for the exemplary educators and the representative educators. The curriculum investments focused on content coherence, common understanding, and gap analysis. Content coherence in terms of how much does the actual curriculum align to the standards. So one thing that I've heard from many districts, and we've seen with other educators, is that folks will say we covered the standards, and they might have made it through the standards, but they may not have met the coverage and the depth of the standards. So if they haven't hit the complexity, then they're not actually hitting kind of that depth that will be targeted for the grade level expectations. So helping folks understand standards as more than just one dimensional as a checklist, but rather they kind of all fit together. There's different levels of expectations in terms of depth are really important. Supporting common understandings, and that's really about common learning goals across the grade level team, across the vertical team, across an entire school, and then across the full set of the district. That can help operationalize content standards. One thing we did note is that schools wanted autonomy. So they, depending if it's a charter school or if it's a school that focuses on a particular kind of magnet program, they don't want to be scripted necessarily, but having a sense of what sample common learning goals and what I can statements might look like were really helpful. I know that that's something that the district invested heavily in, actually, as they were hearing some of the feedback from the focus group. They didn't even, the leadership didn't even wait until we provided our report. And then finally, understanding the content related gap analyses. If you imagine that your standards are kind of delivered across the school year, just to make it easy, 1 to 100, and you've got curriculum that lines up with that really easily, you can start to see we have this gap between sections 20 and 25, and this gap between 40 and 50, and this gap between 70 and 73. And once they see this roadmap for how the standards may not be covered fully by the curriculum, then that starts to kind of identify why you're not seeing performance on certain either progress monitoring assessments or benchmark assessments, because it's all about kind of how a system builds all together. And then finally, thinking about horizontal coherence. And really, we're talking about more structural things that occur at the district level. Assessment calendars, communication, district developed resources, and evaluation support. One interesting finding from the recommendations was that people were really craving this idea of an assessment calendar. Some of them had built that at the school level. Some of them had built that within school leadership teams. but there wasn't any really kind of universal implementation of this. And it's important to delineate between this idea of the district assessment calendar, which I'm going to presume also includes state required assessments, because there's an important distinction between what is required and what is kind of locally selected. And that's just something that often administrators are aware of, but educators may not be, is understanding this full lay of the assessment landscape can help you identify where are things that are duplicating information, where are things that are creating gaps, and where are things that are just not useful. That often requires advisory personnel, and that can be locally selected advisory groups, whether they're particularly well-informed school leadership team members or administrators, folks from the state even, external advisors, students especially. I think that the student voice has to be also included when you're talking about what assessments you find as useful. And it's important to counterbalance that utility perspective from the student side with also the educator side, because they're going to come at it from very different angles. The communication structures and resources, there's a lot of detail in the report, but it's really about helping folks understand what do standards mean, what are the performance standards in terms of depth, and what are the common baseline expectations for how we're trying to either remediate, maintain, or accelerate learning for any student, depending on kind of how they were impacted by not just COVID, but really how their historical loss of foundational concepts were exacerbated by the pandemic. And then finally, or second to last, district developed resources, mostly because I think there's an expectation that there's a common denominator of quality, but also of messaging around the district developed resources so that they can have greater quality and coherence. And they tend to be then a comparison point for schools to say, are we kind of on the same stack as what the district is developing as well? And then assessment evaluation support, which is basically, are these assessments really doing what we want them to do? And are they giving us the information that we think that we're going to be able to use most effectively? And then I'll just summarize with some conclusions, because these are more rehashing than anything. But the district level perspective has pros and cons, right? And I think you see this with the state. The more the state imposes, the less flexibility is perceived by the district. In the same way, the more the district provides or imposes, the more it can lead to perceptions of control and lack of autonomy at the school level. So there's a significant need for a partnership perspective, much like we did with the focus groups in the interviews. Identifying the intended role of the district in the whole CIA process. What is their role in providing model curriculum or scripted curriculum, providing instruction exemplars or providing instructional resources, making assessment decisions for all or allowing schools to make their own assessment decisions, figuring out the highest priority uses and the highest priority assessment characteristics are going to help drive those highest priority resource decisions, which will then ultimately dictate the design and structure of the assessment system. So again, these were key decisions that were presented in the fall that NPS has been working through to determine how to exactly identify the right design and structure of the assessment system, which includes a support component. But before turning it over to the district leadership, I did want to turn it back over to the board members and just see if there's any additional questions for clarification or if there's anything you'd like to hear more about.
Thank you, Juan. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues?
Hi again, it's Mary Ellen. I'm interested in knowing how you you don't want to do all of these assessments. We'd spend all our time having assessments and not educating or not, teaching the basic teaching. So how are you going about helping our school system pick and choose?
Yeah, that's a fantastic, I think, an insightful question. And one thing that I kind of wear my own, I think, bias on my sleeve. The state summative test at the end of the year takes a pretty small amount of footprint in terms of like the spin up and the tear down. And really you're talking about probably like a week of time at the end of the year, to be fair. When folks say teaching to the test and they're saying there's so much test prep going on, and so that's eating up a lot of time, the response is that if you're actually meeting the complexity and target of the standards, and you're working through your curriculum in a structured way with your scope and sequence, that is actually teaching to the test. So it isn't about test prep, it's about standards prep and curriculum prep. And so if you have a strong culture around teaching and learning that's focused on curriculum and embedded curriculum assessment, the test will actually take care of itself. And so that's a short amount of time. Now, where I do think there's value is thinking about standardized assessments or more infrequent interim assessments as points of corroboration. And what I mean by that is that if we're only using a tool that's 3 times a year, if we're seeing students kind of have this kind of trajectory, but their performance ends up being down here, our local data story is not being corroborated with our external performance benchmark. If, however, the performance benchmark is actually up here, and our goal is to actually get way up there, then that is in fact corroborating our story, and we need to continue doing what we're doing. So it's almost like a within-year evaluation check. That is there's an investment there, no question, and you lose some instructional time there. But everything else that I've been talking about, local assessment practice, curriculum embedded assessments, lesson plan-based assessments, bell ringers, end of unit tests, those are things that are typically done by and for teachers, which ends up being somewhat part of, I think, the teaching process. So it ends up being a very kind of pedagogical exercise. So our recommendation, and we were pretty overt with this, is eliminate anything that duplicates the same information. Because if you have 2 assessments, and I'll give you an example, if you have, let's say, a dyslexia screener, and you have a interim assessment that's intended to be like a low band of performance test that also includes kind of phonics and fluency and dyslexia, they're both giving you the same thing, because the dyslexia screener is not just a dyslexia screener. So pick the one that you think is getting you the better bang for your buck and eliminate that other thing, and lay that out on a timeline. So that assessment map that I told you about is a key thing where you're wanting to really identify how much time are you spending actually engaged in instructional process, which I will say formal and formative assessment practice and local assessment is more akin to instructional process, whereas interim assessment and state summative is not. So you can imagine the next thing I'm going to say is, so don't try to use interim and summative assessment to inform instructional progress, which everybody wants to do because you have the data, but that's not what it's for. It's for system monitoring. It's for, are you closing gaps? Are you making progress? Is your PD working? Is the intervention that you selected this year in this curriculum program actually making the gains you thought it would? That's, I think, so it's about, I think, not letting the state summative or the interim have as much of a footprint as it kind of tends to, it sucks the air out of the room. So name it for kind of what it's intended to do, and then invest a lot on the curricular resources, excuse me, but be very systematic and selective in your corroboration tool. And that's kind of like the way that I like to think about it. What's the corroboration tool you want to use? And is it giving you the kinds of information content-wise that you can use to corroborate whether kids are making progress?
Thank you, Juan. And thank you, Mary Ellen.
Oops, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
So I was going to say, and maybe you've answered this question. So what are the factors that you will use to determine what to recommend that the district use? And I would imagine that you have different recommendations for different school districts, right?
We do. And actually we provide I would say, almost a 2-path process. So Sherry, I think your question is like kind of the meat of it, right? Like, so what? Which I think is where NPS is going to talk a little about what they're actually doing based on these recommendations. But we tended to lean more towards the curriculum investment side and honing in on curriculum embedded assessments because they give you more real-time strategy. So rather than having something that like you're administering every other week or every 3 or 4 weeks to see whether students are making, like what's their growth score on this national norm percentile, think about select a benchmark assessment, but makes that selection on a standards alignment, a performance expectation alignment, and a coverage alignment decision. So we do think there's value in interim assessments. How you select that interim assessment is the most important aspect of it. Because if you have something that you're not using because it's actually not telling you the information that you need, then don't buy it. If you're wanting to buy a prepackaged curriculum, those often come with curriculum embedded assessments. So you may not have to invest in the resources, but those tend to not be as high of quality, and they tend to not have the same level of buy-in. One unspoken, I think, rule that we see in curriculum implementation, I think, you don't hear so much about it as assessment, is that if a school district is responsible for building its own curriculum and curriculum embedded assessments, they're often crowdsourcing that from teachers, which means you all of a sudden have a lot of buy-in and a lot of reflection of what the students are exposed to in the curriculum. So it automatically has a certain level of cultural relevance and responsiveness built into it. That's a little harder to do when you're vetting external curricula. So the direct recommendations were really around investing in the curricular development and embedded assessment process, because that's more about informing instruction. Select a interim assessment if you choose to invest that route, that gives you an external benchmark to corroborate against that progress within those assessment frames, and gives you kind of an insight as to whether students are making progress on those end of grade level expectations. But if you do select an external benchmark style assessment, make sure that you're covering those things like minimizing administration burden, communicating around how it's used, helping people understand the actual intent of the data behind it so they don't over extend the intentions, and make sure that people know how to access the data. So really invest in that professional development route so that they can see how this actually fits in with their own teaching and learning. The last thing you want is for a benchmark assessment to be, all right, we're going to funnel these kids into the computer lab. They're going to take it. We're going to look at their scores. Oh, they're not doing so great. Okay, well, back to teaching. It should be about, okay, let's think about the standards that we've covered over this assessment. Are groups of kids doing this? Is this like just a few kids that are breaking down, or are we seeing a large proportion of students that just didn't make progress on this kind of bundle of standards? Because that should then inform school leadership team planning and vertical and horizontal team planning. And that's really, I think, so we're advocating a lot more for implementation strategies, more so than like advocating for one specific assessment over another.
Thank you so much, Juan, and thank you, Sherry. I am keeping an eye on the time. It's 8:16, and I know we have a lot more to cover tonight. So I know this has given us a lot to consider in terms of context about how we approach assessment. It makes me wonder who will assess the assessment. But it is one part in our ongoing initiative to build that data analytics piece that Dr. Estrella came on into the district wanting to build, and to help us think about how, as Juan has said, that can help us be more intentional about how we think about everything related to instruction, from curriculum and even spatial needs, and just making sure that we create the best opportunities for our students.
Yeah, and I think it might be appropriate, Colin, sorry, it might be appropriate to transition over to the NPS teams. I think they almost have a little bit of a response to my call about the kind of the steps that they've undertaken to address exactly how to assess the assessment.
Okay.
So I think Marianne and Rob, you can speak a little bit to the work we've started. Just for the sake of time, we can also follow up at the next session in greater detail, but I think if you can give just an overarching of the work that has already started as a result of the findings of the assessment review.
Sure, absolutely. So one of the areas that we really needed to start in the fall was building out an assessment strategy. As you heard Juan talk about, it's what is the intent of the assessment? And so that was our first purposes, whatever assessment we were going to be using, to be clear for all of our practitioners as to what was the purpose and what's the protocol and how are we using it and why are we using it. So that was the first piece. And we started by selecting some universal screeners, which are our DIBELS and NWEA assessments that we give to our students, K-11. And that purpose is to just provide us with some baseline data to identify students who have who are at risk or who may need SRBI, but it's really not to drive instruction. And so that was something that I think prior it was used as a driver of instruction. Bringing back some of the other components that we've talked about throughout the year is we have improvement teachers that are tied to those universal screeners that are providing SRBI interventions. So you can start to see how everything is interconnected in the work that we're doing. And we've provided professional development tied to those interventions. But as Juan was talking about, the curricula embedded assessments are really something that as a district team, as a curricula team, we have focused on, and that's both common formative assessments and common summative assessments. And we've built those out in literacy and math. And we've really started to see how that is connected to the standards and then driving the instructional practices that we are doing. So in a common formative assessment, we're identifying students who may need more time, more scaffolds or support, who needs extension, but also the teaching strategies that are most effective. And then, as Juan talked about, the common summative assessments are really to evaluate content mastery and application of skills and standards. So we have embedded those in all of our literacy and math curricula units that we've built out. And with the summative assessments, we have all calls. And then from those all calls, we have our practitioners coming back and we're updating our assessments, saying, you know, is this connected to the standard? What do we need to update and change for next year right in the moment? And the other layer, and I'm going to pass it over to Marianne to talk just a little bit about how the teacher teamwork that we have been doing in all of our schools is directly connected to these assessment strategies.
Thank you, Rob. Good evening, board. So to make these shifts in practice that you've been hearing about really required the collective focus and action of a lot of people, you know, from our teachers to our coaches, to our school leaders, to our district staff. And when you think about where does this work live, because if we want to take this we want to make sure the data is actionable and can actually guide teachers' day-to-day decision-making in real time, because, you know, you wait a few days or a few weeks, that data becomes outdated. And so the driver for this work has been through the teacher teams. And so we have been really focusing on training our school leaders and our coaches to engage with their teacher teams in this work. And the three major buckets are really making sure when we look at a unit plan that we're about to start, we're analyzing that final assessment and the standards to make sure that we all have a shared understanding of what students need to know and be able to do by the end of this unit. And that's really ensuring that we are adhering to that. The standard is the minimum that you heard Juan speak to a little bit earlier. So making sure we have that shared understanding even before we start to plan our daily lessons. And then as teachers are working their way through the unit, they're looking at what evidence of student learning are they gathering, because then they're coming back in their teacher teams and they're looking at the student work together. And they're looking at the student work to think about who's ready for an extension tomorrow? Who do I need to circle back to? Perhaps I need to do a reteach because the number of students who didn't understand it. And so the coaches and the school leaders are really guiding the teacher teams through that work. And I think one of the really exciting things through this work is really how teachers get to learn with and from each other. And so, common assessments allow us to have a common conversation around what students are learning and how they're doing. And if I see my colleague, who demonstrated her students really improved, I want to know what strategy she used in her classroom so that I can be learning from that. And so I think it's been really wonderful to watch the schools advance and strengthen their teacher team work over the school year. We're excited to see it continue to build off just of what some of next steps that we've already identified is those common assessments, expanding those to all subject areas so that it's not just math and ELA literacy. Thinking about the state has interim assessment blocks available that we are thinking about piloting. But to Mary Ellen's question earlier, we want to balance keep that balance between keeping our focus on instructional time with very thoughtful opportunities for assessment in a way that helps us enhance our instruction versus distracting from it. One of the things that we are looking as a curriculum and leadership development team is to providing more rubrics and even exemplars of student work. So I spoke about teachers needing to be clear and working with to make sure, what do we want students to be able to do? Well, we want to be able to show them, here's a student sample of work that shows you exactly what a model student response would be. And this is really just helping us calibrate and making sure that we're coherent as a district around expectations. And that our director of school improvement is really going to be a key driver with this work and continuing to enhance it. So it's exciting work, and it's exciting to see how people have grown and really looking forward to the work ahead. So Dr. Estrella, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you. So this just gives you kind of a glimpse of the work that we have been doing, particularly in refining our assessment system district-wide. Obviously, this will be work that we will continue to embed as the year comes to an end, and we'll continue to reinforce within the new year. We will continue to train our leadership team as well as our educators throughout the district in order for them to effectively implement these practices, particularly because one of the things we want to emphasize is effective scaffolds for students based on their diversified needs. And in order to do that, we have to make these instructional moves with informed make those moves with information that helps us make informed decisions. So this is work that we will continue to modify and improve. And particularly now that we have a data and analytics team, we will make sure that the team continues to support the overarching umbrella of work that falls within the data-driven instruction paradigm within the district, but most importantly, that our educators are getting the resources they need so that our students get access to the standards, whether they are engaging the standards above their current grade level or they need access to the standard within their grade level. I'm going to transition now to Diane Filardo and Rob Pennington that will speak to the Panorama survey and its findings.
I just wanted to take a moment to say thanks, everyone.
But before I do, I just want to thank the Center for Assessment and their team for an amazing presentation today.
Yeah, and it's good to see everyone. And please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jan.
We will continue to be in touch.
Bye.
Good evening, Board of Education. Tonight, we are going to get an overview of the Panorama survey. In March, students in grades 3 through 12, teachers and staff, and families participated in the survey. Next slide, please. Here are the topics that we are going to cover. Next, please. Okay, the students have 2 surveys. They have student SEL competencies when you see for growth mindset and emotional regulation. And then there's a second survey on their perceptions of school environment and support. Next, please. Teacher surveys are anonymous. They have 6 topics, and they have some background topics, questions that help us to disaggregate so we can get some sense of how our teachers who have several more years of service than others are perceiving our school district. Next, please. We have family topics, 4 topics. The last one, school and district communication, are some custom questions that our Norwalk leadership team has requested. And these topics are very important to us in terms of knowing the perception of families to our schools and teachers. I'm going to take a look now next at participation. You see on the right the 2022 participation rates, the student target of 80%, the actual of 77%. The teacher survey participation exceeded the target at 91%, and family exceeded the target at 36%. Going back to student participation, though, the elementary level participation did reach 86%, the middle school participation 88%, and high school participation rate was at 65%. But if you compare the response rates in 2022 to 2020 response rates, you see that we are higher in for every stakeholder group. Next, please. Next, Roland, if you can just scroll through the animation, go again. Okay, so you can get an idea. This is a sample question to illustrate the survey design and to see the choices that the participant have in terms of answering questions. And typically the 2 top choices are considered positive responses. And when we look at results, that's important to understand. So typically a question, not all, but most have 5 choices. And the 2 top choices are considered positive responses. And for each topic that we saw listed in the prior slides, there's a set of questions, typically 5 or 6 questions within a topic. And so we can get a good sense of the category. Another thing to note is that the questions are framed differently for students in grades 3 through 5 than they are for students in grades 6 through 12. Next, please, Roland. We're taking a look at the SEL results. We're looking at the 2 topics, emotional regulation. By grade, you see students in grades 3 through 5 had a 43% positive response. 44% of the responses were positive for students in 6 through 12. In terms of growth mindset, you see higher positive response rates for both groups, 60% in grades 3 through 5, and in grades 6 through 12, you see 53%. And way over to the right, you see comparisons back to the 2020 school year, which are comparable for both topics, for both SEL topics. Panorama offers some percentile ranges that they gather from information from the 1,500 school districts that they do surveys with. So it gives us some idea where we fall within those other school districts for those particular topics. Next, please. This is a topic that we added since 2020, which is really important for our NPS focus, and that's rigorous school expectation. So we see that overall for grades 3 through 5, 80% of our students' responses were positive. And if you look by grade, the platform allows you to disaggregate by grade, you see that grades 3, 4, and 5 were all more or less on par with the overall positive response rate. To the right, you see the set of questions that go into that 80%, and you see individual favorable response rates for each individual question. Now that's grades 3 through 5. Next, please. You see the same topic for grades 6 through 12. And if you notice a lower overall positive response rate, and the pattern by grade shows that the response rate decreases by grade. To the right, you see the response rate for the questions, individual questions. Any questions at this time? Next, please. So now we're looking at the topic student-teacher relationships that we surveyed in 2020 and 2022. You see the overall response rate ticked up slightly in 2022, an overall response rate of 80% versus 78%. And you're seeing again, for grades 3 through 5, there's very little difference in positive response by grade. And again, you see individual questions. Next, please. Again, the same topic for grades 6 through 12. We see lower overall response rates, again, a little higher in the 2022 survey, but here again, we see a pattern that by grade, you see that the positive response rates decrease. Next, please. Panorama gives us the ability to look at results by selected groups, and there are heat maps. So based upon the findings that we found from the survey, particularly looking at grades 6 through 12, we see our MLL students had higher positive perceptions of school belonging, climate, and engagement. If you look at the top 6 through 12, you see all respondents and the positive responses to all 6 topics in the student school survey. If below you see students by ELL or MLL status, yes and no, and you see yes, I am an MLL, and you see that the heat map shows that the positive responses for our MLL students for school climate, grades 6 through 12 were 10 points above the district positive response and 12 points for school engagement. And for school belonging, 5 points. We saw that same positive increase for MLL in comparison to the district response in grades 3 through 5, not quite as high, 5 points for school belonging, 2 points for school climate above, and for school engagement, 3 points above all respondents. So this platform allows this kind of analysis to take place both on the district and then on the school level. Any questions? Next, please. Okay, we're looking at staff leadership relationships, again, comparing 2020, 2022. There are actually 9 questions in this topic, but I just want to point out, you see for each individual question, the percent positive, we have the overall positive percentages, which were very similar in 2020 and 2022. The one difference for teachers who were at a school for the same school for 11 or more years, there's a more positive response in 2022 of 62% compared to 55% in 2020, and those are overall responses. Next, please. These are the remaining questions, just so you get a sense of the type of questions that were asked of our staff in terms of leadership relations. This is an example of the type of topics that are covered. Next, please. Now, again, this is new. This is a new topic. This was a request of our leadership team, and we were surveying families on their perception of communication, both from their child's school and also from the district. And overall, it was 79% favorable. We actually looked at results by race and ethnicity, and Hispanic families, Black families, white families, the favorable response rate was all 79%. Asian families were slightly higher. Multiracial families were slightly lower, but the response rates were quite stable. Next, please. This gives you a look at the race and ethnicity of families who responded to our survey in 2020 versus 2022. You'll notice in 2020, 27% of family respondents were Hispanic. And in 2022, that increased to 36%. So you can see the distribution. Finally, you see two topics, school climate and school safety, that were part of the survey for all stakeholder groups. And you see the percent favorable by the stakeholder group for school climate. You see the students, family, teachers, and likewise for school safety. So we get a sense of perception of all the stakeholders on the same topic. So as we look through the topics, next please. We have some suggested focus areas. That's school belonging for students in grades 6 through 12. Student engagement, again, 6 through 12, and staff growth mindset. Those were topics that stood out that we as a district really need to monitor as we move forward. Any questions?
So Diane, this will serve as a baseline, I believe, right?
Correct.
Because this is the first
That's
time we're
right.
doing this, right?
Well, no, it's not the first time because we did some comparisons to 2020. But
Okay.
that
Oh, that's
was,
right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but this truly is a baseline. This is I would like to say post-COVID, but coming out of COVID, gives us a sense. So I think this should serve as a baseline for us.
Right.
Any other questions?
I see Godfrey's hand. Godfrey, you there? Maybe having some audio issues. Mary Ellen, I see your hand.
Yes, I'm concerned about school safety. I'm sure we all are, but I'm concerned about student perception and what we are planning. It wasn't mentioned in the focus areas. What are we planning to do to create a safer environment and create ways of communicating what will happen if something of a scary nature occurs, so that students know what can happen and how to protect themselves and their thinking if dangerous things occur again.
So we have protocols in place around our safety procedures that we will continue to implement and further educate not only the staff, but also the students. We have the safety and security task force that has been looking not only at the findings, we'll look at the findings of the survey, but has been looking at the current processes in the district and looking at ways to improve them and strengthen them. So a lot of the information that we have gathered here and also other sources that we're utilizing will be utilized to inform the work that the Safety and Security Task Force is doing in aligning some of our practices district-wide.
Will we do this again next year? Is that the goal? When would it be done again?
Yes, our goal is to give it again next year in the fall March window.
In the fall, March? Okay.
Yep, it is, I'm sorry, the February, March window. That's when we actually do the assessment.
Thank you.
And I
the
think that
entire team.
I was just going to say, I think that then we will be able to compare this year's data with next year's data and really see some of those comparisons in the work that we're doing as a district.
Yeah, I was going to say that having that data, especially the ability to do those kinds of longitudinal comparisons, I think is so helpful for us as a district in terms of identifying those areas of focus. It's really great to me to see how we can drill down into the different kinds of student groups and the different kinds of response rates from among different populations. Do we also have this data by school building?
Yes, the data is available by school building.
And so I thank you, Diana, because my next part of my question was, thinking about how we might be able to apply some of the solutions the action steps we take from this, and really kind of tailor it to each school building, because we know it's not always a one size fits all. Is that something that we're going to try to implement as well in terms of our next steps?
So each building leader has this as part of their school improvement plan. They will be using this, the results from this survey as part of their school improvement plan to guide the work that they plan for next year.
And Rob, specifically, in terms of activities that this survey will influence, in terms of change of practice or how to look at that, does the survey give insight on where to change any applied practices, how to really inflect on what is working? Does it give that type of detail to guide just some of the corrective plans in a improvement goal?
So for our students, the answer is yes. There's a playbook that is embedded with Panorama that leaders and teachers can then use to help guide some of the focus areas, such as emotion regulation and growth mindset. So there are, in that level, yes, but from a teacher and family engagement, no, that piece is not there. But that is part of the work that we're doing with our leaders.
Thank you for your answer.
Yep.
Are there any other questions?
A comment?
Go ahead, Mariela.
I'm just, Rob, what you're saying that we'll be having the survey again next year, and I'll be looking to see if we can connect what we just heard about with assessments and the curriculum work we're doing to increase the rigor of the work. The one area, the multi-language learners, it dipped into a negative in that their perception was it wasn't rigorous enough. And it would be my hope that that next year that number will much improve, because the actual curriculum presented to them will tighten up and be more challenging. You agree, Rob?
Oh, absolutely. That is our hope. We're also building in a lot of strategies for our teachers, and we've partnered, and our MLL team has really been doing a lot of work, not just elementary, middle, high, across the board. So it'll be interesting to see the comparisons for next year.
And if I can, thank you so much, Robin. If I can go back to the piece that Godfrey was asking about, which is, the resources that Panorama offers, particularly for, for the student level. I think it's great to know that there are some things that our teachers and other leaders can use. How are student voices and perspectives incorporated into some of those discussions, if at all?
So one of the things that Dr. McBride and I have done throughout the process, one, when we're visiting schools is, particularly we started this at the secondary level, is meeting with a cohort of approximately 10 to 12 students. And in some cases, multiple groups with different, that are receiving different kinds of services. And through those conversations, we also gather their input and additional qualitative data of what they see in terms of their learning experience in the schools, and what are some of the things that they're hoping to see differently, particularly in terms of the actual curricula implementation and how they feel that it's being embedded, and what are some of the things that we could as a system do most effectively to support them, and what are the things also as a system that we're doing well in the pursuit of their development as well.
That's great. I'm so glad to hear that. I think sometimes some of the best perspectives for how we can support our students can come from our students themselves. I appreciate that. Are there any other questions or comments from the board on this piece? Seeing none, I'll turn it back to you, Dr. Estrella, to wrap it up.
Thank you. So one last point, as you know, the positivity rates across the state and the nation at large have been increasing. And I'm just gonna ask Ms. Sandra Fayois to just give an update in terms of where the numbers are, and just wondering how the board feels about moving forward with a recommendation of just recommending wherever possible to wear masks in the hopes of reducing the transmission rate across the district.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So hi, good evening, board. Good evening, Dr. Estrella. Hoping everybody is on the road to recovery. I would like to say that last week's COVID numbers did see an uptick the way that we have across the city. I'm sure that you have been watching the news and you know that Norwalk has gone into the orange, which means that we have increased our numbers in terms of our community level. And it was in the yellow just a few weeks ago. So we did see last week that we had 149 positive cases. This includes home tests and PCR tests that were reported to us. The week before that, there were 125 cases. So that is an increase from the week prior. And so far this week, we have had 73 positive cases reported to us between Monday and Tuesday of today. So that's where we are today, and thought that the board would be interested in that information as you're making a decision. I'm available for questions if you have any.
It's probably more, right? Because people doing take-home tests, at-home tests, are they required, if someone tests at home, are they required to report that to the school district?
They report it to the city. The city shares it with us. So
Okay.
there is a portal by which parents
They
and
can do that,
families
right?
can do that, and the city does gather that information
Okay.
and cross-reference with them.
Thank you.
So Sandra, if a parent calls in and says, I'm keeping my child home, we just tested positive for COVID, are they then reporting that to the city, or are they being directed to the city? Because I've been asked that question.
We would report it. We
So
cross-reference
the
each other to make sure that
school
we're not
would-
doubling up.
Okay.
So the city may get some reports and they'll inform us. There's actually a spreadsheet that we have that is shared. So the city has a spreadsheet and they will say, Ms. Bakey called, Joey is positive. But if we got that report too, then we don't count that twice. We just make a note got it, you know,
Right.
so that we're making sure that we're not double counting people that are reporting through multiple sources. So we do have a shared
Okay.
data
So
source.
for parents' purposes, either place they can report.
Yep.
Okay.
Correct. Mhm.
Yeah, and thank you for those updates, Sandra. Clearly, you know, I think everybody is seeing what's happening in Norwalk, throughout Connecticut. It's like, I think it's across the country as well. We've seen this uptick in the COVID positivity rate. I think in many ways it is different from, you know, what we may have seen a year ago with Delta. We have a lot more folks who are vaccinated and who have gotten their booster shots. If you haven't, please do. At the same time, you know, we want to make sure that we don't find ourselves back at a place where, you know, we have to take stronger mitigation measures. So, you know, Dr. Estrella, I think I would be in support of issuing a mask recommendation to our school community. You know, to be, you know, when you're in public places around, you know, in close proximity with others, I think better safe than sorry. We're almost through to the school year, but we're not there yet. And so we want to make it intact. We want to make help our families and our students stay safe and healthy. And so, you know, as a board, we are meeting virtually tonight to make sure that we're mitigating any spread of infection. And so, yeah, I don't know if we need to take I don't think we need to take a vote on that, right? We're talking about a recommendation or advisory, not a mandate. So unless you're on mute, Dr. Estrella, said if you're.
Oh, I said okay.
Okay. Okay. I don't know if there's any objections or other perspectives from board members. Okay.
And
Hi, Colin.
Yes. Hey, Sherelle, how are you?
Can you hear me? Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear
I was
you.
pressing the wrong button. So you're saying basically that we should do a suggestion and not a mandate? Is that what's on
I
the
think
table,
that's
or is it a mandate?
Yeah, I think that's the superintendent's recommendation. It also coheres with the action taken by the city of Norwalk, I think a couple of days ago. They did not reinstate a mask mandate. I think that's a challenging thing to do for a lot of reasons, but they did issue a strong mask recommendation in public places.
So yeah, that we did that last week as well. Just so we added an addendum to our for the library to the code of conduct, and so the addenda is basically, you know, stating that we want to keep people safe, and we made the suggestions, you know, that they social distance and you know, wear masks. So we have not yet mandated it, but we did make the suggestion. So I think it's a great idea.
Thank you, Sherelle. Yeah, I think any kind of consistency we can have across the city, across our public services like our libraries and our public schools helps it easier for folks to know, you know, how to operate. And I think people, you know, can be trusted to make the decisions that will be safest for themselves, their families, and for their neighbors. So, you know, we're just reminding people that we're not out of the woods yet, and that we can only get there by being as safe as possible.
And Dr. Estrella, if I may add one thing, it's just that we do still have home tests that we have available at the schools. So families are always welcome to ask for home tests. We are not in the same position where we were limiting the number of home tests the way that we had been before because of the positivity level was so high. We actually ended up getting another shipment of tests. So we have enough tests for students to take tests before attending proms or attending somewhere. So the key word is that you would test before attending somewhere if you're not feeling well, and then hopefully you would make the right decision and not attend if you actually tested positive. So we have plenty of those at the school, and we do still have the vaccination clinics that parents can take advantage of. So it's the three-prong approach of adding mitigation testing often, and then vaccinating when available and if possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Mhm.
I might come in for a couple of those tests myself.
We have some.
Okay.
The Family Center also has plenty too.
That's right.
Sandra, in the schools, are the tests in the nurse's office or
Yeah.
in the front office, or where should
They're in the
students go?
nurse's office.
Okay.
Mhm. We are still monitoring and keeping inventory, but you're welcome to get tests at every school has enough.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. And there's 2 points that we'll talk more when Alunda engages in the financial report, but just really quickly, in terms of the South Norwalk Incubator, we're moving forward. We found creative ways in which to make this a reality. And the second component that Mr. Asmani can speak in greater detail in the financial report is the increase in our insurance costs, that we've also found ways in which to address the shortfall in the higher percentage rate that came in than relatively what we were expecting. So I'll turn it over now to Chairman Hostin, and we will speak in greater detail of that within the financial report.
Thank you, Dr. Estrella, and thank you to the entire team. A lot of really great, rich data tonight. It really helps make our work, I think, much more effective. So thank you. Just a technical note, I think she's going to try to log back out, but Janine's mic is not working, so she has not been able to take part in the discussions tonight. Okay, so we'll keep moving on to the next part of our agenda, which is our consent vote, which allows us to approve personnel changes, budget transfers, school trips, and the minutes in one vote, unless there's any objection. And so I will call for a motion to approve the consent vote, personnel, budget transfers, trips, and minutes. Is there such a motion? Thank you, Mary Ellen, seconded by Diana and Sherelle. Thank you. All in favor of approving the consent vote, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you so much. The consent calendar is approved, and that takes us to their next action item, which is the approval to renew our partnership contract with the Carver Center. Carver has been running our After the Bell program for many years, and we have an opportunity to continue that relationship. I don't know if we need any additional context for that, Dr. Estrella or Sandra.
Can you repeat the last part?
I don't know if we need to, this is the renewal of our agreement with Carver. I don't know if we need to know anything in addition before taking this vote.
So Ralph and I have been working with Navalette in our collaboration together. As you know, she's been instrumental in our After the Bell program and some of our summer enrichment opportunities for our students. So it's a continuation of the partnership and the work that she has already been doing with many of our schools. Ralph, I don't know if you want to speak to really briefly about some of the schools that have been added since this collaboration was initiated. I know we have a few more schools that have joined the partnership.
Sure, definitely. And this is, once again, it's really a renewal of our current partnership. So every 2 years, we really need to renew our contract to say what are the roles and responsibilities, and this is just truly that. At the end of the contract, you see a schedule of all of the different programs that will be happening this current year, and we will update that for next year during the renewal as well around this time. We have After the Bell in most of our schools at the moment. One of the newest additions was CMS, as well as adding CMS to the 5th grade scholars program. But as Dr. Estrella had mentioned, these programs are After the Bell programs, our middle and high school transition programs, as well as the after school programs that occur at the middle schools. So it's a combination of all of those, and that we can share our resources with the Carver Center, allowing them to use our facilities.
Thank you, Ralph.
I know Carver is a wonderful program. I love Carver, but are we beholden? Do we have to do an RFP every year and put it out to bid? Or do we have to do that in this type of situation? Is that because
No,
we're
so every 2 years, what we do is just renew this. So this contract basically says that we are allowing them to use the facilities. These are the roles and responsibilities. You need to have your insurance in place. It's generated by the city as a typical one of our typical contracts. We just updated the dates to reflect the next 2 years.
And because they also offer, like, they bring in their own private philanthropic funding to provide the services, they're supporting us in programming and funding a lot of our after-school programs. We provide a contribution, but when you look at the total cost of the program, it's several $1 million, and we pay a small fraction of that.
they're pretty much operating the whole program. I mean, they're a total separate operation. It's not as if, because I was surprised when I read the contract. I didn't even know that it was in that much detail, that it was done that way. So thank you.
Correct, Sherry. I think the way I've always thought of it is it's more of a partnership. It's not really something that we're putting out to bid. The contract is, not to diminish it, is a lot of, kind of legalese about what they're required to do and what we're required to do. But this has been a very productive, as you say, Sherry, partnership for many years. And it's such an important part for the wraparound services that we provide for our scholars and their families.
And it's similar to our partnership with with PTech at NCC. So in the same vein, it's both organizations are contributing an element of their resources to fund the program that provide great opportunities for the kids at large.
Great partnerships. Great partnerships.
And we love Novelette as well. So thank you.
She's a great partner.
She is. Okay, so I think I can start by asking for a motion to approve this partnership renewal. Godfrey, thank you. Seconded by Mary Ellen. Is there any further discussion about this contract renewal? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to call it to a vote. All in favor of renewing our contract with Carver, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Contract is unanimously renewed. Thank you to everyone involved. And that takes us to another contract approval, which is our approval of specialized transportation services. We got a brief overview of this in our finance committee meeting last week. Is Joanna here?
I am.
Joanna's here.
Oh, there you are.
Hi, good evening. How is everyone?
Hi, Joanna. We're okay. How are you?
Good, thank you. So we're requesting a vote of approval for specialized transportation services. A recommendation and necessary documents were provided in the board packet. Our current contracts expire June 30th. So entering into a 3-year contract with our incumbent vendors provides NPS with continuous, safe, and reliable transportation. It allows the district to stay within requested budget for the 22-23 school year. It allows us to continue the opportunity to rideshare services with neighboring districts. And both companies are currently fully staffed with licensed and certified staff and drivers. These are important factors during an uncertain times of inflation, national driver shortage, and rising fuel prices. So we're looking for a vote of approval tonight, and I will take any questions that you may have.
Joanne, it's pretty much the same, right? Nothing has changed in the contract from the current contract?
No, just the
Same?
contract, just the contract pricing.
Okay.
Thank you, Joanna. And I also appreciate the context about the fact that being able to approve these rates now will likely save us a lot of money as national trends show these costs going nowhere but up.
Correct. We've been seeing across the state that the bid submissions have been anywhere from 6% up to 24%. And that's with some incumbent vendors in certain districts. So it just shows you, the pathway we're going in, the trend.
Okay, so I think the Finance Committee voted to recommend this to the board. So I think I'm going to ask for a motion to approve this contract renewal. Kara, thank you. Is there a second for the motion?
Second, Brown.
Thank you, Sherry. Is there any further questions or discussion about this particular item? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion on the floor. All in favor of approving this contract, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The contract is approved unanimously.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joanna. And moving right along, I think this is a new addition to tonight's agenda. This is the approval of the new table of organization for our specialized learning department. So I'm going to ask Dr. Estrella to introduce that to us, and we can call it for a vote.
Thank you. I'm going to allow Mr. Pennington to speak to this minor shift since he's the head of that department.
So we're in the process of looking for a lead in the specialized learning area, and in an effort to try and attract high quality candidates, we would like to create a title called Executive Director of Specialized Learning. It would still fall under the schools department, but it really would allow us to attract other directors across the state or in other states to join our Norwalk team and continue the work as we're looking to expand programs for our students and continue the work.
Thank you, Rob. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Kara.
So where is this in terms of like the staffing plan and the budget? Is this something that's already been accounted for, or is it replacing another position, or?
It's a swap.
It's a swap. Swapping what?
Swapping the current vacancy we have, which is an education administrator for special education.
Okay, sorry if you just said that.
And yeah, and elevating it to an executive.
Got it. Okay.
Director of special
And so
education.
it's already completely budgeted in terms of salary. There's no change there.
There is a shift in salary. This is a higher tiered role. So there will be a difference in salary around $20,000 to $30,000. But because of the shortage and the need right now, we want to make sure that we are competitive in the field, given what we need to do that work, role and do that well.
Okay, and the additional 20 to 30 is coming from?
Special education budget.
Okay.
I think Godfrey had a question and
oh, sorry, go ahead, Godfrey, and then Mary Ellen.
I just didn't put my hand down. I don't have a question. Sorry.
Okay.
Rob, you had mentioned there will be new programs that this educational leader will be in charge of. Do you have the programs absolutely in mind, or are you looking for someone who will bring some new thought in?
So we have been working on expansion of programs, and I'll give you a couple examples.
Okay.
Our Pine program at Fox Run will be expanding into a new classroom next year. Our co-teaching model is going to be expanding at Brookside, and we're looking to implement a classroom at Jefferson. We have a literacy academy at Narrowmack, and we're looking to set up a second literacy academy in another one of our elementary schools. So we are looking to expand programs to support our students and really to continue to meet the needs of all of our students.
Okay, so you need this position to lead those expansions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay,
Not
thank
only
you.
to lead those expansions, but to also
I'll-
continue and supervise the overarching work that's happening in special education. We currently have a vacancy that we're trying to fill. And one of the challenges that we had was that the current portfolio of candidates that we received do not align with what we want in terms of the qualifications to engage in the work. So we're hoping that by elevating the role, we can find stronger candidates that can help us engage in the level of program design and support of the department that we need.
Sounds like a good strategy.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. And I do appreciate framing it that way. You know, when we think about, there's another, a very slightly higher impact to salary here. It is actually a relatively small investment to be able to build a relatively large amount of capacity, right? We want to make sure that we're attracting the best and brightest minds here to Norwalk, and the impact that's going to have on our specialized learning department across the district, I think is well worth it. So I appreciate the thinking behind this shift. So if there aren't any other questions or discussion, will someone make a motion to approve this adjusted table of organization?
So move Brown.
Erica, I see. Thank you. And seconded by Sherry. If there's no further discussion, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the update is officially approved unanimously. Thank you all. Thank you, Rob and Dr. Estrella, for taking the lead in that initiative. And that's our final action item for tonight. We'll move the agenda right along into our information and reports, starting with our monthly financial report. And Lunda, you're on deck.
Thank you. And so you do have the narrative information with the narrative explanation of the trends year to date. We are almost through the end of the year. We are about 83% of the year in, 10 months out of 12. Budgetarily, we have spent about 70% of our budget, which is consistent with our trends. We do have a lump sum balloon payment for teachers that are paid throughout the summer. And we typically make that balloon payment in June. We encumber the funds in June, but it's paid out throughout the summer. But for accounting purposes, that payment is accounted for in June. So we do see a spike, but as far as trend is concerned, we are consistent with where we would be. As Dr. Estrella mentioned earlier, we are currently working on a year-end projection just to kind of get a sense of where we will be. As Dr. Estrella also mentioned, is we did have two challenges this year. Obviously, we had $1.8 million budgeted for our Sono incubator school as part of our FY23 budget, but through the budget process, that did not get approved in that fashion. But we have since had meetings with the mayor and his finance team, together with the mayor's chief of staff, Dr. Estrella, myself, and Dr. McBride, representing the Board of Ed. And so we're working together to find a funding solution. The mayor is committed to making both of these things happen. So as far as the Sono school, what we're looking at is the use of some of our unencumbered funds at the end of the year. You recall that each year, any unspent dollars, we request them to roll over. And so our plan this year is to apply those towards the incubator. We feel like we will have sufficient funds, at least initially, to allow us to move forward with that programming. As you know, identifying a source for that is critical to us moving forward with plans, with recruiting, and just getting the school in place and ready at the CMS location for next year. The second item that we're also looking at is the health insurance increase that I shared with you. This is not unique to Norwalk, it is statewide. One of the things that we've looked at is we pay the insurance in an insurance fund from the times when we were self-insured. So we had that fund that built up reserves over the years, and predecessor Tom Hamilton over time, we had gradually depleted that fund to meet these types of situations. And so with a combination of the funds that are there now that we ended with last year, we've got projections for this year where we'll end. We anticipate, just because of claims history and usage history, we will have some additional savings in that fund this year. And so we anticipate we will be okay in rolling those two over and provide funding to cover health insurance for this year. So I think those are two updates that I wanted to share with you. But other than that, as far as the financial picture year to date, we are looking well, and everything is consistent with where we would anticipate to be at this time of year. I'll provide more detailed updates next month as we get closer to the year and closing out the year. But so far, that's what I wanted to share with you. And the narrative does provide additional information with the sources of the trends.
Thank you, Linda. Are there any questions for Linda on this financial report? I would say, as per usual, you anticipate the questions and include the answers in the narrative, which has been really helpful for us to follow along. And before we move along, I just want to give a quick shout out to Linda and Kristen and the entire finance team, because I think one of the reasons we can respond to this insurance increase and to being able to move forward with the Sono Incubator School next year is that they've done some really great diligence in keeping our books as up to date and clean as possible throughout the year. When we do these budget transfers every month, that's because of the work that Linda and his team do to make sure that we have a very clear sense of where we are in the budget, so that we know as much as we can how we're going to end up the years. And so I really appreciate that work. I think it allows us to be as responsive as possible to so many shifting sands in our landscape. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we can move along to committee representative reports. If there's something going on in your committee or a group to which you are our board liaison and that we did not cover tonight, and you'd like to give us a quick update, please do so.
I'll start. Tomorrow evening, there is a Norwalk Public Schools and Equity Institute is having Racism 101, offering a community for our families. Just wanted to give Dr. McBride a shout out for organizing that, really being intentional about conveying what we're doing in the schools to the larger community.
Thank you, Godfrey. Other announcements? Okay, I'm just going to, before we move ahead, just want to thank our board members, and looking ahead to our graduation ceremonies next week. We have a lot of ceremonies for our high schools and middle schools, and we as a board want to continue to just encourage and congratulate all our scholars on their achievements. And we hope to have, I think we have confirmed board representation at each of those ceremonies. So we'll be there to congratulate you and clap along with your families and teachers and celebrate with you. Moving right along, we have now an opportunity for any board member announcements? Anything that that's going on in your world, your corner of the world that you'd like to share with us tonight?
Colin, did you want to mention about the new reimbursement rate? I mean, I don't know, is that the appropriate for
Well, we didn't.
the schools going
Yeah,
forward?
thank you,
Because it's
Sherry.
been in the press. I mean, everybody, I mean, there may be some people who don't know about that. Instead of getting the low reimbursement rate, school construction projects are going to be reimbursed 60% from the state for the next 25 years so that we can really be aggressive with our plans. And the Norwalk High is going to be at 80% reimbursement rate. And also the district did get the 50 million to do the pool. So that's all exciting news. So it's been reported, but you know, there may be some people who didn't know about that, who may be looking at this meeting. So I just wanted to get that out. So that's exciting. Yay!
Yes, absolutely, Sherry. Worth repeating if people have already heard. Excellent news for the city of Norwalk, for our Norwalk Public Schools. Everything that Sherry just said, I think is going to be really life-changing for our district. And I just want to publicly thank all the many people who had a hand in making this happen. Here at the board, we set policy, we approve our budgets, and we have certain oversight of the district. One of the things we were able to do in the last couple of years was look at an actual 25-year school construction plan in conjunction with a third-party consultant, which was all well and good if we can fund that. And so I'm so appreciative that some of these other pieces are falling into place. We've got a city administration that has been very, very supportive of our school construction plans, including with the new Norwalk High School and what's going to be happening with Cranberry. And now this piece, the 60% reimbursement from the state, is going to be a game changer. Thanks for reminding us, Sherry. Yes, we did talk about it in finance, but we want to make sure we're shouting that from the rooftops. It's going to be a huge, huge deal for us. Okay. I think if there's no other announcements, we'll move on. We did have a possible executive session anticipated for tonight's meeting. That executive session is going to be rescheduled for an upcoming meeting, so we will table that for tonight. And the only other announcement I can give is just a general get well soon for all of us who are feeling a little under the weather. Times are what they are. I'm so glad that we're still able to meet, at least in this virtual setting. So on that note, if there's nothing else, is there a
Thanks
motion
to the staff. Just want to thank everybody for all your reporting and all the information that you guys gather up and the logistics and all that stuff. Thank you.
100%. It always takes a village. We've got a great village here. And so if there's nothing else, I'll invite a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Erica. Seconded by Kara. All in favor? We are officially adjourned.
Aye.
9:25. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of your night. Stay safe, stay healthy, get vaccinated, get boosted. We'll
Feel better,
see you
Colin.
again very soon. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good night. Thank you for everything.
Bye-bye.